the Young Turks. Awesome show ahead for you guys. We got a lot of great shows, in fact, that I want to tell you about coming up. March 19th, we're going to do another Bernie Sanders town hall event online. Young Turks and a number of other partners, and it is going to be about income inequality. Senator Elizabeth Warren joining Bernie Sanders in that town hall. That's great. Michael Moore, economist Eric Hamilton. So we'll bring that to you. So tune in at the regular time, and then we'll go to the town hall when that begins. That's on March 19th. That's a Monday. March 20th is a Tuesday, and we have election night coverage. The Illinois primary. Lots of really important races in Illinois. Every primary night, check out the Young Turks election coverage right here on tytnetwork.com/live. That's also where you can get the Bernie Sanders town hall. Okay, on today's show, awkward moments with Donald Trump. I got one coming up for you in the first story. I got one coming up for you in the next segment. I've got a fun prediction for you guys today. And an absolutely critical meeting that Mueller is now digging into. It's a meeting that I told you about almost a year ago now. And I said it would be of great import, and it looks like it now is. So all of that on the program today. Let's get started. Okay. Gary Cohn's top economic advisor to President Trump. He's leaving. The ostensible reason is he disagrees about the steel and aluminum tariffs. Now, as I explained to you when that news first broke, nobody's nose got broken, by the way. When the news first broke, it's not about that. That's what everybody's reporting. No, there's two reasons why Gary Cohn's leaving. One is they already got the tax cuts. That's trillions of dollars in tax cuts for corporations and the rich. That was his number one objective. Steel and aluminum tariffs are tiny in comparison. And number two, he's getting out before the indictments. It's in White House in complete and utter chaos. And who the hell wants to stay in that building any longer than they have to? And Cohn thinks, we're not gonna get anything else done. And so I got the tax cuts and I'm out E5,000. So this is gonna be his last cabinet meeting. So he's sitting on the side because he's not in the cabinet, he's an advisor. But Trump decides that he's gonna say goodbye to him. Oh no, don't, just be quiet, just let it go. No, instead this.
This is Gary Cohn's last meeting in the cabinet and of the cabinet, and he's been terrific. He may be a globalist, but I still like him. He's seriously a globalist, no question. But you know what? In his own way, he's a nationalist because he loves our country. He's going to go out and make another couple of $100 million, and then he's going to maybe come back. He might come back, right? We'll be here another 7 years, hopefully, and that's a long time. But I have a feeling you'll be back. I don't know if I can put him in that same position, though. He's not quite as strong with those tariffs as we want.
What is that? That's maniacal. Okay, in case you don't know the other meaning of globalist, let's go to Talking Points memo. While the term globalist can refer to a person who advocates for economic and foreign policy in relation to developments throughout the rest of the world, the term is more widely considered an anti-Semitic dog whistle. By the way, Gary Cohn is Jewish. Oops. Look, even if you meant the other version of globalist, since the version that is more widely known is widely known, I wouldn't have talked about it in reference to a Jewish person who's leaving your administration. Anyway, look, that's one part of it. The second part of it is, what are you doing? Just let him go and say thank you for your service. Instead, makes it horribly awkward. He's not on strong on tariffs, but he'll probably go and come back. He'll come back, he'll come back. In other words, damn it, I didn't want him to leave, and oh, I bet he comes back, I bet he does. And he'll make a couple $100 million and come back. By the way, that's the problem. He was the president of Goldman Sachs. There's the revolving door, that's why they call them government Sachs. They go in, they get trillions of dollars in breaks for Goldman Sachs and their friends, which is exactly what Gary Cohn did, and then go back out, make a couple $100 million more, and then come back in and rig the rules again. If you're looking for who rigged the rules, it's guys like Gary Cohn. So I got no love for Gary Cohn, but even I wouldn't have sent him out like that. That's just uncalled for. Okay. So now let's go to, that's just a quick story, fun for everybody. Let's go to Huckabee Sanders. Okay. Sarah Huckabee Sanders stepped in it for understandable reasons on the issue of Stormy Daniels. Now, Stormy Daniels, the adult actress who had an affair with Donald Trump, she explained it in gory detail back in 2011. Donald Trump apparently got his lawyer, Michael Cohen, to do an NDA. Now, Michael Cohen says, look, I happen to do the NDA and I happen to pay the $130,000 on my own. Donald Trump, I don't know. Well, Michael Cohen didn't sleep with her. Donald Trump slept with her. So obviously that's who it was for. Now, Stormy Daniels come out and said, the NDA is not valid. Donald Trump never signed it. Michael Cohen signed it. That doesn't make it valid. It was not to hush up about anything related to Michael Cohen. It was to a hush contract about the affair that she had with Donald Trump. Okay, so now Sarah Huckabee Sanders has to answer questions about that. She's got to say that it's resolved and that it's not an issue. Well, she's in an impossible situation because Donald Trump has asked her to lie in 13 different ways. And so she accidentally screws up and admits something that's true. Now, her overall statement, don't get me wrong, she's the press secretary for Donald Trump. Her overall statement is not true, but a part of it is. So that's really important. Let me show it to you and then I'll explain.
Made very well clear that none of these allegations are true. This case has already been won in arbitration, and anything beyond that, I would refer you to the president's outside counsel. And again, this case has already been won in arbitration. Anything beyond that, I would refer you to outside counsel.
You said that there's arbitration that's already been won? By whom and when?
By the president's personal attorneys, and for details on that, I would refer you to them.
So what more can you share with us?
I can share that that the arbitration was won in the president's favor. Yeah, I've had conversations with the president about this, and as I outlined earlier, that this case had already been won in arbitration.
Oops. So the reporter had a puzzled look on his face, and rightfully so. Did you say there was arbitration? When I saw the headline, I thought the same thing. What arbitration? It turns out there was arbitration in the case, which Sarah Huckabee Sanders should not have admitted, because that admits that Donald Trump is involved. It was hush money for covering up Donald Trump's affair. She should not have admitted that. Now, is it true? Absolutely true, no question about it. So, what's the untrue part of her statement? That he won the arbitration. So they went to an arbitration hearing without Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, called for a secret arbitration meeting. That's not how it works. You gotta let the other side know. So that arbitration meeting was nonsense anyway. Second of all, they didn't win it. They got a temporary restraining order saying, hey, Stormy Daniels, don't talk about this in public until we actually have the proceedings and conclude them. That is not winning an arbitration proceeding. She didn't even show up, she didn't even know what was happening. And number three, he didn't sign the contract. Trump didn't sign the contract. So you can't have an arbitration proceeding about a contract that doesn't exist. So about the substance of winning it, she's absolutely wrong. The fact that it happened is absolutely correct. Oops. So that then makes Trump apparently angry. CNN's Jim Acosta mainly doing the reporting here. I will have a summary here for you from The Hill. CNN's Jim Acosta reported that Trump is, quote, very unhappy with his press secretary after she acknowledged at a press briefing on Wednesday that Trump has been involved in a legal dispute with Daniels stemming from her allegations. So today, of course, the Trump White House is denying, mainly through Fox News. Sources tell Fox News, no, he's fine with it. No problem at all. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out for a press conference today. Oh, no, right, she didn't. She canceled the press conference basically in hiding in a bunker. So if Trump is not upset with her and there's no issues about what she said, they have a curious way of showing it. Let me give you one more of CNN reporting here. Abby Phillips again referring to Acosta's source, saying, according to this source, Sarah Sanders' comments were essentially putting the Stormy Daniels storyline on steroids yesterday. And if, in case you're wondering why Trump cares so much, he's had dozens of affairs. He's had dozens of women accuse him of sexual harassment and assault, which is far worse than any affair. Well, Stormy Daniels in her latest court filing said that she has texts and pictures. That's why he was trying to cover it up. And that's why he's upset at Sarah Huckabee Sanders for screwing up and admitting that it's real and that it is his contract, even though he didn't sign it. One last thing, people are getting all over Sarah Huckabee Sanders here, and I'm gonna do an ironic defense. That job is impossible. Trump asked you to lie in both directions. It's not doable. Trump is not at all involved, but he won the case. You can't do both. And then Trump tells you to do one thing, as he apparently told her, and then when she does it and it backfires and blows up in his face, he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong because he's a child. So he says, no, you did it wrong. Gary Cohn left, are you kidding me? Who can stand this guy? Of course he left, everybody's gonna leave. I'm surprised Sarah Huckabee Sanders has hung in there for that long. It's a miserable, miserable job to have. Okay, now let me go to my fun prediction, okay? Rex Tillerson is our Secretary of State. He was the former CEO of ExxonMobil. Now I've been telling you for a long time that he was put in to that position because of a deal that the Russian government cared a lot about. It was a deal between Rosneft, which is the huge oil and gas company in Russia, and ExxonMobil. They were going to explore a portion of Russian, mainly the seas, as you'll see in a second, above Russia, and it was a $500 billion deal on paper. The proceeds were supposed to net out the revenue overall from the oil that they would get there, $9 trillion. Absorb that number. That is not 9 million, that is not 9 billion, that is 9 trillion. So that's a lot of money at stake, and why Russia cares so much about this. So that's why Donald Trump, out of nowhere, picked the CEO of ExxonMobil to be our Secretary of State, which makes no sense at all. So they wanted to lift the sanctions so ExxonMobil could go forward with that deal with Rosneft. Now, it didn't work out because Congress said, hell no. If Senate, for example, voted 98-2 to maintain those sanctions and even add more sanctions on top. Now, Trump has not put the new sanctions into place, but he can't lift the old sanctions, so those are still in place. But then the second thing happened, oil prices dropped, making that really expensive exploration not as worth it economically as it used to be. So today the news is ExxonMobil has canceled that deal. Which is gonna lead to my prediction in a second, but first let me give you the full context here. Go to the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Tillerson touted the agreement as a breakthrough, giving Exxon access to one of the world's greatest unexplored oil and gas basins. This was back when they made the deal. The company reportedly spent about $700 million to drill the first well, likely making it the most expensive ever. It struck oil, according to Rosneft, but further exploration was halted because of US sanctions imposed by the Obama administration following Russia's intervention in Ukraine in 2014. In case you were wondering why Russia supports Donald Trump and the Republican Party and not the Democrats. Both Obama and Hillary Clinton were in favor of those sanctions, and the Russians had 9 trillion reasons why they didn't want the Democrats in charge in America. So now, why does Exxon care so much? Well, for similar reasons. The joint venture between Exxon and Rosneft included exploration in the Kara Sea, as well as other collaborative efforts in Russia. And the US Exxon funded the exploration work entirely, earning a 33.3 stake in any discoveries. So if they were gonna have 9 trillion in revenue, I can do the quick math for you on that. That's $3 trillion on the line. So everybody that was involved in that deal desperately wanted that deal to go through. Hence a lot of the drama that we have seen about Trump and the Russian collusion, I believe. So, but now Exxon's saying, we're done. We can't reverse a 98-2 vote from the Senate. Besides which, at these oil prices, is not worth it. So the company said it would formally begin to withdraw from the Rosneft joint ventures this year, taking a $200 million loss after taxes. So look, $200 million is significant, that's painful, and that's why they didn't want to let it go. But given the amount of money they could have made, it's a drop in the bucket. So they just cut their losses at this point. But they could come back to it, and in fact, the Russians in the Wall Street Journal article kept saying, no, you never know, we're open to doing it again. And I wondered, and so you might have wondered, why didn't the Russians just do the deal with someone else? Why do they want to bother going into so much trouble and making sure? There's a recent story that just came out a couple of days ago about how the Russians apparently back-channeled to Trump. This is what Mueller's investigating, at least, that they did not want Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. He had had some tough rhetoric against Russia. They wanted their friend, and that is literal. Rex Tillerson is a friend of Vladimir Putin, has gotten a medal from him, is a very good friend of the guy who runs Rosneft. They used to go biking together. Picturing them on bicycles going up a hill, motorcycles. Anyway, and so they wanted their friend in that position to lift the sanctions. Again, that didn't work out. But why Exxon? Well, experts say it is unlikely that Rosneft will be able to find another company able to step into Exxon's role, either due to European sanctions or a lack of technical capabilities to drill offshore wells. So one more piece of context on that. Russia's federal budget relies on oil and gas sales for around 1/3 of its revenues. Without technology from partners such as Exxon, Russia will struggle to access those resources. So if you're wondering why Russia went through all that effort, I told you 9 trillion, but look, it's 1/3 of their federal budget. It is gigantic. What wouldn't you do for 1/3 of your federal budget? And that is why I believe, and I have maintained from day one, that is what all of this collusion is about. It's not about trifling Twitter impressions and 21 Tumblr accounts. This was the deal they were concerned about. So now, as usual, I have a fun prediction for you guys, and I will say it ahead of time, and you'll get to see if I'm right or wrong. I believe Rex Tillerson will leave the administration very soon. So tick-tock, tick-tock. Now that the ExxonMobil deal is not going to happen with Rosneft, he has no reason to stay. The whole point of him going there was to lift the sanctions and do this deal. Now, they're going to start handing out indictments soon at the Trump White House. Anyone with 2 bits of sense is running for the hills. Hope Hicks is gone, McMaster's leaving. Obviously, Gary Cohn just left. Everybody had a different agenda. Gary Cohn's agenda was pass trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the rich and for huge corporations like Goldman Sachs, where he worked. Rex Tillerson wanted huge deals for ExxonMobil, where he worked. Now that he's not going to get that, he's going to leave. And at the time, they will say, "Oh no, he wants to spend more time with his family, and he disagreed with Trump on some trifling issue that's not really the issue at hand." But he is gone. He's gone because Exxon's not doing the deal anymore. This is how corruption works. Okay, now we're going to take a break. When we come back, you want to talk about corruption. So Mueller finally apparently has some evidence and is working on that secret meeting that Eric Prince had with the Russians in Seychelles Island. I told you about that almost a year ago. Now you're going to begin to see how important that is as this whole case comes together, and that's why you're seeing all these people pull the chute from the Trump administration. If you don't think it's real, well, Gary Cohn does, and about a dozen or so people who left Trump's White House recently do. So we'll come back and I'll tell you all the details. I know what you're thinking.
I love how you do something with your lips when you play the sound clips.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Look at his lips.
I was a woman.
No, you're closing your mouth. Usually I'll be like, and I'm like, is he like lip syncing it?
I don't know. I never noticed it until you said it.
It's a funny habit.
It's not human intelligence!
TYT member.
They're kicking me out the door. They're kicking me out the door.
Hey, Cenk, what's up?
Aaron, I want to do a YouTube live clip, but not live. Go.
I just shot a clip. It's time sensitive and it needs to be edited right now.
Did anybody call for an editor?
Need this in an hour.
But you're an editor too.
Love you.
Believe me, everybody wants to work in the White House. Everybody wants to be there. Believe me, everybody wants to work in the White House.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Zoe said, as soon as he said globalist, I immediately Googled to see if he was Jewish. Surprise, surprise, not. Yes, so Gary Cohn is in fact, of course, Jewish, and so calling him a globalist is particularly problematic. Mark of the Beast says, Trump made a joke about revolving door between government and corporations. Hey, Democrats, care to take some policy positions against that crap? The answer is no, not really, no. And one last one here, Hot to Trotsky, fun handle, says costing Exxon $200 million minimum and $9 trillion at max is probably the best thing Trump ever did in his presidency. Okay, fair enough, except for given the Democrats had done those sanctions, that money was already gone in a sense. But Trump could, as usual, couldn't live up to his end of the deal with the Russians. All right, speaking of that, let's go over here. So Eric Prince is the former head of Blackwater. He wants the government to privatize portions of the military and the intelligence services. And by the way, in the last budget bill, they did. Not the military part, but the intelligence services. They provided a black ops budget that would go to private mercenaries. And Eric Prince is the one that has been lobbying for that. He's also the brother of Betsy DeVos, who is the education secretary. He's also part of the family that was one of the biggest donors to Donald Trump and his 2016 campaign. So when he met with some very important Russian officials in a tiny island called Seychelles in the middle of the ocean, I thought, that's curious. And that was during the transition period. Well, it turns out that that might have been for back channel communications with the Russians, exactly as we suspected and I talked about on this show at the time. So we're gonna show you that clip in a second, but let me give you some background. In January of 2017, so again, as part of the transition time, Eric Prince, the founder of the private security company Blackwater, met with a Russian official close to Russian President Vladimir Putin and later described the meeting to congressional investigators as a chance encounter that was not a planned discussion of US-Russia relations. Now let me show you how amusing that is. I'll show you a map of where Seychelles Island is. Yeah, Eric Prince, deeply connected to Donald Trump, happened to be off the coast of Africa in this random island in the middle of the ocean, and lo and behold, so was one of Putin's top henchmen. What a wonderful, hilarious coincidence. Come on. Now, when the story of that meeting was first reported, almost a year ago, I had this to say about it. So let me get this right. Eric Prince does a secret meeting with the Russians in Seychelles Islands. And at the same time, we've got Russian banks and the other part of the DeVos family that Eric Prince is part of, pinging this Trump server in the middle of Pennsylvania. And you think those things are not connected. I got news for you. They are significantly connected. Now, the question that could change history, and I'm not using hyperbole here, I mean it literally, is can they prove it? Well, it turns out Robert Mueller, the special counsel, is now looking into if they are in fact connected and in fact is part of the deal. So one more context and amusing denials here. Last year, Prince told lawmakers and the news media that his Seychelles meeting with Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian government-controlled wealth fund, was an unplanned, unimportant encounter that came about by chance because he happened to be at a luxury hotel in the Indian Ocean island nation with officials from the United Arab Emirates. That's another funny part of the story. The UAE brokered the deal, apparently with a guy named George Nader that I'm going to tell you about in a second. And so you've got incredibly important people from the UAE government. You got Eric Prince, and according to other witnesses, he represented himself as the Trump envoy at that meeting with the head of the Global Wealth Fund for the Russians. And he says, I mean, Of all the bars to walk into in the middle of the Indian Ocean, they happen to walk into mine. Come on. Who is naive enough to believe that that was an actual coincidence? That's preposterous. Okay, so we find out today in the Washington Post, Special Counsel Robert Mueller has gathered evidence that a secret meeting in Seychelles just before the inauguration of Donald Trump was an effort to establish a back channel between the incoming administration and the Kremlin. So how did they get this evidence? Well, there's a lot of different ways they could have gotten it, but one guy is George Nader, a wealthy businessman from the Middle East who brokers these kind of deals and meetings. So George Nader, a Lebanese-American businessman who helped organize and attend the Seychelles meeting, has testified on the matter before a grand jury gathering evidence about the discussions between Trump transition team and the emissaries of the Kremlin. If Nader was in the meetings where they actually discussed the back channel deliberations and how the Trump administration would secretly talk to the Kremlin, and Nader testified about it, good night, Irene. But we don't know because it's secret. It's part of the grand jury proceedings. We know that they've got somebody who was there and he has testified. Okay, we're nearing the end game here, guys. Investigators now suspect the Seychelles meeting may have been one of the first efforts to establish such a line of communications between the two governments. These people said Nader's account is considered key evidence, but not the only evidence about what transpired in Seychelles, according to people familiar with the matter. Okay, well, if they've got a number of different kinds of evidence on that, the Trump administration is in even bigger trouble. If you're wondering, hey, what's the big deal? The Russians and the Americans, we communicate. We communicate with the Canadians, the Chinese. Yeah, there's official communication lines, but those are monitored. They wanted unmonitored, unofficial communication that the rest of the US government didn't know about. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder if it was to do perfectly legal things that they could have done under normal channels, or to perhaps do things that they didn't want monitored because they were not so legal. Okay, come on, this is so obvious. It's so obvious. Okay, anyway, let's finish up here. Nader, by the way, not related as far as I know to Ralph Nader, who would be deeply embarrassed about all this. Anyway, George Nader and the Seychelles meeting are also of interest to Mueller's team as it examines whether any foreign money or assistance fueled the Trump campaign and how Trump officials during the transition and early days of the administration communicated with foreign officials, particularly Russians. Look, I've always maintained that I think that the Russian interference in the election is very important as it relates to them getting into the voter registration rolls. They didn't get into the votes, but that would be the next step, and I'm very concerned about that. I am not that concerned about Twitter trolls that they had or 21 Tumblr accounts that they had. And so the Russians funneling money into the election, there was another story out about how they funneled 10 million to the NRA, who then gave it to Trump. That would be problematic. That's a significant issue of foreign interference and money being funneled, which is illegal. You cannot have foreign money in our elections. But overall, I don't think that's why Hillary Clinton lost the election. I think she was a terrible candidate. There were many reasons why she lost the election. I'm not worried about that nearly as much as I am about, does Donald Trump have a secret deal with them, maybe relating to the sanctions being lifted for the ExxonMobil Rosneft deal? That was the original idea, I believe, back then. But whatever the particulars of that deal might be, does he have a deal where he is asking the Russians for what to do when he's our president? That is massively problematic, and of course would and should cost them the presidency. Would, but probably won't. I should say should, but probably won't get him jail time. But it's not, the investigation is not concluded, and if it turns out I'm wrong and they just happened to run into each other at Seychelles and have a drink and they talked about fantasy football and went home, okay, then Mueller will find out and those witnesses will tell him. If it turns out that I was right about it, and by the way, if I'm wrong about it, I'll come out here and I'll tell you guys, hey, sorry, I thought it was a secret deal, but it turns out it wasn't, my bad. If it turns out it was a secret deal and Trump was getting notes from the Russians for what to do with American policy, I'm sure that everyone will also come back and apologize to us, saying, our bad, you were right all along. I'm sure that'll happen, right? Okay. So now, let's go to tariffs. Okay. When Donald Trump first announced that he was going to do tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, he did it impromptu, and he caught everybody off guard. They had no papers ready for it to brief Congress. They didn't have the legal part of the deal set up yet because Trump just got frustrated, came out one day and blurted out, "I'll do the tariffs," because everybody was trying to talk him out of it. Now, I told you at the time, it doesn't mean they're doing the tariffs. Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, and they will work him over, and he'll change his mind 8 times between now and then, and here we are. So let me give you a chronology. We go to alternate here. When Trump initially decided on the plan, he reportedly said that 25% tariff on foreign steel and 10% tariff on foreign aluminum would apply to all countries because otherwise everyone would ask for an exemption. That's right. Now, what happened since then? Well, all of a sudden, a little bit of a backpedal. You got this statement. There will be an exemption procedure for particular cases where you need to have exemptions so that businesses can move forward. But at this point in time, there'll be no country exclusions, said the White House National Trade Council director. So that's backpedal number 1. Well, we're not, okay, fine, there could be exemptions. He said no exemptions, but there will be. But it won't be based on countries. Individual companies can come and ask for handouts through crony capitalism, and we'll do it that way. Okay. Well, then Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out and said, there are potential carve-outs for Mexico and Canada based on national security and possibly other countries as well based on that process. That would be a case-by-case and country-by-country basis. So that's backpedal number 2. Well, did we say no exemptions? Did we say no country exemptions? We meant country exemptions. Canada and Mexico will be excluded, and maybe others as well. By the way, Mexico, the country with the 4th largest imports into our country for steel and aluminum, so that's pretty big. With Canada, number 1. So when you exclude number 1 and number 4, well, those tariffs have lost a lot of its meaning, let alone the other exemptions that are coming. So why did Trump change his mind, and who worked him over? The most obvious thing in the world, the donors. So as Talking Points memo explains, business leaders, meanwhile, continue to sound the alarm about the potential economic fallouts from tariffs, with the president and CEO of the US Chamber of Commerce raising the specter of a global trade war. So when the Chamber of Commerce, with their billions of dollars in political donations, both directly and through independent expenditures and dark money, and the members of the Chamber of Commerce individually giving in all those different ways, when they come a-calling, politicians listen. And Trump has a lot of tough talk, but at the end of the day, he's now a standard greasy politician, and he does whatever his donors tell him to do, and that's where we are. So now, if we left it right there, it would be a classic Donald Trump blundered in, didn't know what he was doing, flip-flopped, and is run by the donors. But there's a couple of other amusing aspects to it. I like this part. White House officials said specifics of President Donald Trump's plan remained fluid Thursday, and it was unclear when the tariffs would be finalized. In other words, he's not really done flip-flopping, and this might all be nonsense. Now, he did come out today and gave a press conference. I'm gonna show you 2 amusing parts of that in a second. And he did confirm that he's going to do the tariffs, but yes, there are gonna be exemptions for Canada and Mexico and perhaps other countries. So his tough guy stance is null and void and is not in play, okay? Here's amusing part number 2. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, when trying to defend this, said this. He's already indicated a degree of flexibility, but I think a very sensible, very balanced degree of flexibility. We're not trying to blow up the world. Oh, so that was in play. So apparently that was one of the possibilities. In other words, we talked him out of it. He now has flexibility because he didn't realize what an idiot he is. And if we had actually listened to Trump, we would have blown up the world. But we convinced him to have flexibility, so we're a little short of blowing up the world. We almost, by the way, dodged the bullet entirely because Trump almost forgot to sign the actual order. So watch this part.
I assume you've all been many times into the Oval Office? Come on, let's go and do that. Let's go and do that. Yes, I'm going to do. We'll go into the Oval Office. We're going to sign this up. We'll go into the Oval Office. We'll have a picture, okay? Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, you idiot, you have to actually sign the thing, right? Like, no, I know, we're gonna go to the office in a little bit. I know I should sign it, I'm gonna sign it. Okay, but that's not the funniest part of the press conference. So he's got these steel workers around him. One of the steel workers comes up and gives this moving speech about how his dad had gotten laid off. And it was that had happened to him. He had 6 kids, his dad did. And he said it was one of the saddest things he's ever seen. And he said, I don't want that to ever happen again. So then Trump comes up and says this.
I thank you for the opportunity for what you do.
Your father's Herman?
Herman, sorry, yes, sir.
Yes. Well, your father Herman is looking down. He's very proud of you right now.
He's still alive.
Oh, he is? Well, then he's even more proud of you. Then he's even more proud.
Yeah. Okay. To be fair to Trump, that person had talked about how his father felt at the end. He meant like at the end of getting fired and et cetera. But it's not the worst thing Trump has done. I can see why he had the wrong impression there. It was more of a Bush moment where light, weird confusion reigns. Like, huh? What? What did I do? What did I do? Right? As opposed to Trump, where he comes in and wrecks everything. So just a funny little ending to a funny little story about how we almost blew up the world with tariffs. Okay, one last story for you in this segment. Okay. So Sinclair Broadcasting is an enormous television and media empire. They have stations in 72% of the United States, which is gigantic. Previous rules used to prohibit that, but now we let monopolies run wild throughout the country. And now they're thinking of buying Tribune, which would make them even larger. They happen to be very conservative. Their owners are Trump supporters. And so they forced the local TV stations to do propaganda from a conservative perspective. And they put it into the so-called news of those stations. Now, you probably have no idea if you have a Sinclair station in your market, because it might be you don't know it is Sinclair. It could be an affiliate for NBC, ABC, CBS, or whatever other station. It's not necessarily labeled Sinclair. And so they tell their anchors, and they did in this newly discovered memo by CNN, appeared to be neutral. Don't even wear red or blue or purple ties or outfits, because you want to give the appearance of neutral journalism. Not the reality of it, but the appearance of it, okay? So the new memo that CNN found, because the local anchors gave it to them, is titled Anchor Delivered Journalistic Responsibility Message. Man, how is that for Orwellian? No, this is not talking points about conservative point of view that you should do propaganda on. It is Anchor Delivered Journalistic Responsibility Message. Okay, interesting. As Brian Stelter explains at CNN, as scripted, the promos decry fake stories from national news outlets, echoing President Trump's inflammatory rhetoric about fake news. It turns out the memo happens to support Donald Trump, just like the owners of Sinclair. What a wonderful coincidence. So instructions to the local station said this: please produce the attached scripts exactly as they are written. This copy has been thoroughly tested and speaks to our journalistic responsibility as advocates to seek the truth on behalf of the audience. How is that for Orwellian political correctness? You must not vary from the politically correct script that we give you. It is on the behalf of the truth and journalistic responsibility that we tell you to read this partisan message. Oh, okay, thank you, appreciate it. The promos begin with 1 or 2 anchors introducing themselves and saying, I'm, or we are, extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that, I love this, proper news brand name of local station produces, but I'm, or we are, concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country. Look, that also goes to a general point that I make outside of the context of the story, which is that a lot of these anchors, God bless them, are not news anchors, they're news actors. They just read the scripts anyway. The producers write the scripts and the anchors read them in a funny anchor voice. Today, live at 5, there's a fire raging, and by the way, Donald Trump is awesome. If they work at Sinclair, right? So But look, some of the anchors there were journalists enough to be outraged by this and make sure that the word gets out on it. So bless their hearts on that. So they tell them to read the script and don't veer away from the script and pretend as if it's you. Like, I, Bob Johnson, working at, make up a station, WERT here in Missouri, think that this is a great idea. Okay, I get it. So as Stelter then explains, then the media bashing begins. The, quote, sharing of bias and false news has become all too common on social media, this script says. Continuing to quote the script, more alarming national media outlets are publishing these same fake stories without checking facts first. Unfortunately, some members of the national media are using their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. So now the national media that they're referring to, of course, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, the people that Donald Trump calls fake news. So, and they do it under the guise of caring about the fact that they are saying those outlets are trying to control what they think, people think, as they're doing a memo about how you should control what people think. Unbelievable. All right, so they have been doing this for quite some time. This is not the first time that Sinclair has been in the news for pushing Trump and conservative propaganda. And so Stelter gives you background on that. Most noticeably, pro-Trump commentaries by former Trump aide Boris Epshteyn have come into local news time. And Epshteyn, by the way, is a guy famously, as the campaign was winding down and they thought they were going to lose, they were doing what they thought was going to be Trump TV afterwards. And he's the one that said, let's see if I got it here, yep.
Sarabies!
They took Sarabies and put him on TV pretending that he's neutral. Preposterous. Okay. Local journalists have also bristled at the so-called must-run packages about subjects that aren't relevant to local audiences, but that are hot-button stories for conservatives. The Terrorism Alert Desk is a regular segment about security threats around the world. So one piece of propaganda after another, not as ads, but as part of the local news. The promos are supposed to start airing. These new promos are supposed to start airing on local stations later this month. The instructions sent to station news directors say that the 60 and 75-second spots should run frequently to create maximum reach and frequency. As George W. Bush used to say, you gotta kind of catapult the propaganda for it to work. The instructions to local stations say that the promos should play using news time, not commercial time, like the Epshteyn commentaries. This takes away from local news time.
Sarabies!
Okay, for those of you who didn't see it, that was just an amusing episode where Epshteyn was just yelling that through the office and getting people psyched about Trump TV. Well, we didn't get Trump TV. Instead, what we got was Sinclair Broadcasting. So, well, how do the local anchors feel about it? Here are some quotes. At my station, everyone was uncomfortable doing it. That's an anonymous anchor at a Sinclair-owned TV station. Here's another quote. This is so manipulative. And then one more. Here, a different anchor said, I felt like a POW recording a message. So that's what's going on at Sinclair. While they're pretending to be neutral, they're basically making their anchors do hostage videos supporting Donald Trump. All right, I am out of time. We're gonna take a quick break here, and we got a lot more coming up for you guys, including, unfortunately, another African-American assaulted, viciously assaulted, but this time over a really important issue, jaywalking. We have the tape, and we have the results of what happened when we return.
T-minus 1 minute till landing. TYT broadcast controllers, listen up. Give me a go, no go for landing. Sound?
Audio is hovering at minus 12 decibels. We're go.
Streaming?
We're go.
Camera crew?
We're go.
Mission control?
We're go.
Snacks?
We're good.
Iguana? Sir, we are go for landing. Okay, everybody. I want this to go off without a hitch.
Sir, I've been looking over this joke for the past hour, and with the bandit firing now weeks old and waning in
English, Johnson, English. What are you trying to tell me?
This joke isn't going to land, sir.
Okay, everyone. Forget the old plan. From this moment on, we're improvising a new joke.
So this is where the show started, and this is where it was supposed to end. Now the joke was supposed to land here, but that's not gonna happen, obviously. So we need to come up with a new joke. Maybe here?
The hits are dropping, streams are failing, retweets are stopping.
40 seconds.
All right, team. We gotta find a way to make this fit into a joke about this that will appeal to them.
30 seconds.
The Trump joke's our safest option. Trying to land a Trump joke after this week's events is a suicide mission.
We are officially out of time. We need to act now.
Sir, I think our best course of action is to let Jink try to land a dad joke.
That's the deal?
That's the deal.
All right, everyone, to their stations.
Led by Germany, Sweden, and some of the creditor nations like Netherlands and Finland.
Cameras, position, social media team.
Race run follows. 10 seconds. As for the rest of us, all any of us can do now is wait and hope.
This is gonna be the worst disaster TYT has ever experienced.
With all due respect, sir, I think this will be the finest hour 2 yet.
Giving mood, Angela Merkel's government seems to have signaled pronounced.
Come on, Jink.
Everyone, it's been a pleasure streaming with you.
Greek Prime Minister immediately picked up the phone to Putin and said, "You Putin any money in?" Okay, anyway.
TYT crew, the joke has landed.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you. 2 quick tweets for you. Hashtag 2IT Live to talk to us during the show. Mark of the Beast says, if there was a deal between Trump and Putin, Trump better chemically test everything he drinks now that the Exxon deal has been canceled. So, good point. Pedro Rios Leao writes in, because there's a lot of people who watch the show from different parts of the world. The other day when we were doing the election coverage in Texas, we had somebody who said they were staying up till 4 a.m. Watching it in Germany. Obviously, we got some great fans in Japan. But Pedro writes in, I'm living in a rural area in Baha'i. I'm living on collecting rainwater. I've just got the satellite internet connection, and comparing my way of living kind of off-grid with this kind of international interaction is mind-blowing for me. This is a revolution for me. Wow. So that's amazing. So Pedro, welcome. Welcome to the world.
How did you find us? Tell us more. That's amazing. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got for us, Anna?
All right. Unfortunately, we start off with a pretty disturbing story. The community of Asheville, North Carolina is reeling today following the release of police body cam footage that showed an interaction with an African-American resident in the area who they stopped over jaywalking. Now, the video has gone viral and it's nearly 9 minutes long, but we do have the relevant portions of that video to show you, and it's incredibly disturbing to watch. But understand that on the day Johnny Jermaine Rush was approached by the officers, he was walking home after the end of his dishwashing shift at a Cracker Barrel restaurant. So he gets off work and apparently he jaywalks, and the police were not too happy about it. And so they approached him and words were exchanged. If you watch the full video, which we will link to in the description box below, you can see Rush essentially telling the cops, "I'm tired, I just got off of work, just stop harassing me." They ask him, "Do you want to get a ticket or do you want to be arrested?" And he's like, "Do whatever you need to do, just stop harassing me." And then it escalates to what we're about to show you. And again, the video is incredibly graphic, but it gives you a sense of why the community is so upset. Take a look.
Put your hands behind your back. Do not. Stop. Drop the bag. Put your hands behind your back.
Okay.
I just told
Sir, look.
No, mother. 43 on foot. White male. A black male. White tank top. Thinks it's funny. You know what's funny? You're gonna get up hardcore. Get on the ground. Get on the ground, Rush. Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back. Put it behind your back. Now, stop. Just put it behind your back.
Rush, put your hand behind your back. Rush, put your hand behind your back. Okay. Rush, put your hand behind your back. There you go.
Behind your back. Behind your back.
Okay. My hand's set. Oh my God. There you go, Rush.
I can't, man.
Hand behind your back. I can't breathe. Oh my God. Ow. Rush. Okay. Lie down, please. I can't. Put your hands behind your back. I can't.
Put your hands behind your back. Behind your back.
So luckily, Rush didn't die from that interaction. More often than not, when we cover these types of stories, someone loses their life. But there were two cops present at this scene. One of them was Officer Chris Hickman, who's been with the police force for some time. And then he was with a trainee by the name of Verino Ruggiero. And he has not resigned. He is still employed by the police department. However, Chris Hickman has since resigned since this incident. And also the police chief, Tammy Hooper, said that she would be happy to resign if that would quell the public discontent.
I'm sick of it, man. I'm sick of seeing this. And all right, look, obviously there's a racial component. This area is 12% black
and very segregated.
And I'm tired of seeing the cops pushing down a black guy's head into the concrete, et cetera. But there's arguably an even bigger class component to it. So he was jaywalking. Look, I keep using Beverly Hills as the example, but it doesn't matter. In Asheville, North Carolina, if there was a businessman and not a dishwasher, you think they're gonna treat him like that? You think they're gonna tase him over and over again? You think they're gonna grind his head into the ground and punch him in the head 4 times? They're not gonna do that to a guy that's a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman or the most important person in America, a political donor, right? They're not gonna do that to him, and you know it. And so then they wonder why not just the poor, but the middle class are tired of oftentimes literally being crushed. And we feel the weight of that power crushing us. And I'm sick of it. We're all sick of it. And so then some people will say, well, look, he should have done what the cops said. Okay, well, first of all, he was jaywalking after a long day. Just what are you picking on him for? Again, if he was in a suit, there's no way the cops stop him. And you know that, you know it for a fact, okay? But let's say that they do, right? And then they get into this altercation. You know it started with jaywalking. You know the guy's not dangerous, etc. And he says at one point, as Hannah pointed out, and it's in the tape, he says, look, like, you want to get arrested or a ticket? He's like, do whatever you got to do. So it's not like he's like some wild guy who's not listening to direction and appears dangerous. He says, do whatever you want to do. And so they decide, I mean, at most you should give him a ticket, right? Why would you choose arrest over a ticket? Why would you choose to escalate the situation rather than de-escalate it? Because like what the excuse that cops use all the time is, I was afraid for my life, right? The dude's a jaywalker and he told you to write him a ticket, and instead of writing him a ticket, you chose to arrest him to escalate the situation. Then, of course, the number one thing the right wing will say is, why did he run? Well, if this is how African Americans get treated day in, day out, all across the country, what would you do? Would you be like, oh, great, the cops are here. I bet they're here to help me. No, you get scared. You get legitimately scared.
Also, I mean, look, there have been instances where a person has been shot and killed by a cop even after complying and being incredibly careful. So Philando Castile is the person who, comes to mind off the top of my head. He literally told the cop, I have a licensed gun in the vehicle. Cop asks him to, show license and registration, and as he reaches for it, shot and killed. So look, I think that in this case, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I've become so incredibly desensitized to this type of violence that if the person doesn't die from excessive force, I feel relieved. I mean, everyone should feel relieved, right? But you see these stories throughout the country, and in a lot of cases, people don't make it alive, and I'm so happy that he didn't lose his life over this. Now, he did get charged following the incident, but the charges were later dropped. Police records show that he was charged with second-degree trespass, impeding traffic, assault on a government official, and resisting a public officer. In September, though, the district attorney in Asheville reviewed the body camera video and decided to dismiss all charges. Also, I wanted to show you another very short portion of the video because it kind of gives you a sense of how the cops felt about this whole situation after it had gotten physical. Take a look.
You okay? Ow, man.
I got blood all over me from his face.
So backup arrives, they ask if he's okay, they ask the cop if he's okay, and he says, I have blood all over me from his face.
So they're not worried about the guy who's bleeding from the face. They're worried about the guy who has the blood from the face on his arm from after assaulting him. So look, that's the other thing that annoys me about the police state that we live in. And so some people say the body cameras are not enough, but it's a good start because they catch stuff like this, and your cell phones catch things like this. Before this happened nonstop, we just never saw it, right? And then if anybody complained about it, they're like, oh yeah, probably a criminal complaining about good cops, right? So what do they charge him with? A second-degree trespass, impeding traffic. So I wanted to see in the video, because I read about it first, then I'm looking at the video to see who was impeding traffic. He had already crossed the street. Then they stop him, and then they are all over the street. The guys who were impeding the traffic were actually the cops. Well, if you cared about impeding traffic, you wouldn't have bothered to do all this crap in the middle of the street.
So I want to focus on silver linings, and I know that sounds crazy, but just hear me out for a second. First of all, district attorney drops charges, and my guess is because he did review that body cam footage and saw that he was not impeding traffic, and then trespassing where? That's public space. He did not trespass anywhere. So the charges were dropped. That's a good sign. Here's another good sign, though. Following cases of excessive force or police brutality, more often than not, the police chief, the police union, the people involved will push back aggressively and deny any and all wrongdoing. But that is not the case here, and I thought that was interesting. So as I mentioned, the police chief has suggested that she will step down if that makes the community feel more comfortable. She also said the following. Let's go to graphic 43. The whole thing is bad, right? It's just a terrible, egregious case. The whole reason around the stop to begin with was just a bad thing from start to finish. Look, I gotta be honest, you don't usually hear that kind of response or reaction from other cops, much less a police chief. So I feel like there is some progress, and that's something to focus on and keep pushing for real justice.
She also said that she was going to fire Hickman, and he resigned right before she fired him. And that's actually happens all the time. But I wanted to get to the other charges as well, because I'm like, you're right, there's some progress. Like I said, the body cameras are good, but this happens all across the country. They charged him with an assault on a government official and resisting a public officer. Who was assaulting who in that video? So and then they tell us no, just believe the cops. Don't blindly trust that cops are all good guys. When I see resisting an officer, and sometimes that's the only charge. That means we arrested him for no reason, because you have to have an underlying charge for resisting an officer. Most of the time they don't. Here they did, the infamous second-degree trespass and impeding traffic. And then assaulting a cop, 9 out of 10 times means they assaulted you. Like, because if you actually assault a cop, I want you to get arrested. That's a terrible thing. I don't want any assaults, let alone on cops. But now, how many times have we seen they say, oh, he assaulted me? Then you look at the videotape and they're kicking the crap out of him. And they're like, but I got his blood on me from punching him in the face so many times. You see how he assaulted me.
And not only were they, one of the cops punching him repeatedly on the head, after he had already been restrained, he's on the floor. The other cop tases him simultaneously. And by the way, when he kept yelling, I can't breathe, I mean, who did that remind you of?
Eric Garner.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so lastly, I wanted to also point out the tasers. The tasers' initial idea was, hey, instead of, like, if you're in a really bad situation and you're thinking of shooting someone, instead of shooting them, just stun them instead. And I thought, that's not what cops are gonna do, okay? Like, if they think there's any kind of danger, they're gonna shoot, right? So what are they gonna use the stun guns for? When they feel like someone's not complying and it's a hassle to get their arms behind them, right? Or they're not listening to me, give me this stun gun, we'll make this guy listen. So it's not to stun them instead of shooting them, it's to stun them to show them who's boss. And you saw it happen there in that video. They already got the guy down on the ground. One cop's already punching him in the head, when the other one's like, let's do a gratuitous stun here. All right, give me the stun gun. And by the way, that stuff can give you a heart attack, but they treat it lightly. On the other hand, you remember the guy on the ground was jaywalking.
We got to take a break. Let's do that. And when I come back, I will share a story about how the FBI is in cahoots with the Geek Squad at Best Buy, and they're spying on you.
But they are, though.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's out of control. All right, we'll talk about it when we come back. That 300 million is a pretty good number, we were doing a press release on it and I got all worked up and I said, okay, well, that's the size of the US population. You know what our next target is? The size of the entire world on the road to 6 billion. Although by the time we hit it, it'll probably be 7, maybe 8 billion. Not a big deal. A couple of days ago on the TYT network, we passed 1 billion views.
What the hell?
What the hell?
No, that's a big freaking deal.
2 billion views.
What now?
Sorry.
What did we do? 2 billion?
2 billion.
They said it couldn't be done, but it was done.
We just crossed 5 billion views on YouTube.
I mean, imagine 10 years ago thinking, one day.
People looked at you like, are you nuts? Young Turks crosses 6 billion views. They said you couldn't do it, you can't change the media, don't try. Well, here we are, we're changing the media. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Been easy for me. I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. All my life, I was told no.
He said I had small hands. They're not small, are they? I never heard that one before.
All right, we've got a lot of tweets for you guys. We've got breaking news for you guys. And I forgot to tell you that after the Young Turks today, Rebel headquarters has Dennis Kucinich. He'll be on the program. And James Thompson, the guy who almost won in a special election in Kansas. And since he came so close to winning in a really Republican district, the Democratic Party has decided they're not going to support him. Okay, anyway, see a pattern here? Okay, Sean Phoenix says about the tape we just watched, he was screaming for help from the police. He was getting punched in the head while screaming for help. I'm surprised he didn't get shot while running away. The cops escalated the situation hard. Michael Graham says, I live in Nashville and everybody jaywalks. I have never heard of anyone getting a ticket, much less arrested for that. Yeah, because they go to pick on people. And gee, I wonder who they're gonna pick on. The powerless, of course, right? Danger Carlos Danger says, I was illegally searched, arrested, and robbed by a cop. And all I can think about that now is that if I were black, I'd have been shot because I had a pocket knife.
Jeez, yeah.
You know what? That's deep, man, and it's true. Like, I don't know if that, of course, I don't know for a fact that would have happened to you. None of us do, but they do interpret different situations differently based on some factors, including, of course, race. So anyway, glad you're with us. All right, what's the breaking news, Anna?
All right, the breaking news is Kim Jong-un has offered Donald Trump an invitation to meet, and in that invitation, he also indicated that he will halt all nuclear missile testing. Now, this is an interesting development. We do know that South Korea and North Korea have been engaged in diplomatic talks, and that happened prior to the Olympics, and I guess those talks have continued. But this is a good sign. However, I feel skeptical about all of this. We'll see how this all turns out.
Apparently, Trump made the announcement and his staff was caught off guard, which
is typical Trump fashion.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, they're probably, no, wait, hold on. We should think about what our responsibility, there he goes. Okay, now should Trump pull a Rodman and go to North Korea? Then he's not gonna go to North Korea. But should they actually meet? I don't know. Look, I don't, there's two different sides here. One is, I don't trust anything the North Koreans say. They're Trumpian. They say one thing, the next day they say the next, and it's all a bunch of stupid games, and it's really annoying, and they're not remotely trustworthy, the North Korean government, obviously. On the other hand, I believe in talking to your enemies. So the preposterous idea of, and neocons always said this, and they still say it about Iran, we shouldn't talk to our enemies. Well, okay, but we could talk to our friends all day long. That's not gonna help resolve any conflict.
That's right.
In order to resolve a conflict, you gotta talk to your enemy. So yeah, I guess I would say do it, but with a lot of reservations and safeguards in place.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that we're talking about Trump, and he's the type of person who admittedly is not interested in national security briefings or briefings in general. And so he doesn't strike me as someone who is knowledgeable on the nuances of this very important foreign policy issue. But with that said, I do think that this is a considerable step up from what he was doing before, which was tweeting juvenile tweets and making fun of Kim Jong-un's weight.
Yeah, I wonder if he'll call him Rocket Man to his face. But actually, Anna, I hadn't thought about it that way, and that is a counterpoint to meeting. Because if the North Koreans are savvy, all they'd have to do is, oh, Mr. Trump, we did not realize how stunningly handsome you are in person.
That's exactly what I mean. I feel like Trump softens toward people who say nice things to him, who compliment him, who boost his ego. And Kim Jong-un is a terrible person, but he strikes me as a little smarter than Trump is.
But that's a really low bar.
It is a low bar,
okay,
yes.
Super low bar. And so if they come in and go, Mr. President, your hands are awfully large, he might go.
You know what? Continue with that nuclear testing.
But I'm not.
Big, beautiful nuclear tests.
He might literally come out and go, look, on the nuclear testing, he denied it. He strongly denied it, right? And so I think there's some good people, there's some bad people there, but there's some good people in the North Korean government. I mean, they've got some bad concentration camps and they've got some good concentration camps. So, you know what? Actually, a lot of the rest of the world, might be missing an opportunity here. It is actually incredibly easy to rook Donald Trump.
Right.
And so,
even with the issue of Israel, for instance, and building the settlement. So one day he's 100% pro-Israel. I'm going to name Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Boom, it's done. And then the next day he'll criticize Netanyahu over the settlements.
Yeah.
And so it really depends on who he's communicating with on any given day or in any given hour.
Or any mood that he has. And he could, if he was smart, he could use that as a negotiation strategy. He has no strategy. So Israel, their government, led by Netanyahu, who apparently is very corrupt, unsurprising. He's terribly right-wing, got no interest in him, but he is a savvy guy. Nobody thinks he's stupid. And so he does the smart thing, which unfortunately a lot of countries could do if they had bad intent in negotiating with us. Whenever Trump says something that Netanyahu likes, oh, you want to move the embassy? Deal, done, thank you, all right? And he says something they don't like, you should get rid of the settlements. Just wait him out. Wait till tomorrow, and he'll forget about it. And then whenever he says something you like, I'll take it. Okay, so I hope the North Koreans don't do that to him, but at a bare minimum, at least we're talking, and it's an interesting offer.
Right. Moving on to other news. A new report by the Electronic Frontier Foundation found that the FBI was working with members of the Geek Squad at Best Buy in order to catch individuals who had child pornography on their computers. So the idea here was that if someone had computer issues and the Geek Squad was working on that computer issue, the FBI would pay members of the Geek Squad to turn in that person if they had child pornography on that computer. So this is a little bit of an issue because, of course, the FBI, any law enforcement should have a warrant before going through anyone's computer. And in this case, the Geek Squad essentially worked as an arm of the FBI because they were informants. The FBI paid Best Buy Geek Squad employees as informants, rewarding them for flagging indecent material when people brought their computers in for repair. So how did this case even come about? Well, of course, it involved one specific individual who fought back. His name is Mark Rettenmeier. He's from Orange County, California, a physician and surgeon. He took his computer in for repair when it wouldn't boot up. Now he faced child pornography charges after a Geek Squad employee flagged his computer to the FBI. So he had child pornography on his computer. That's obviously an issue. But here's the thing, if you obtain evidence in an unlawful way, that evidence gets thrown out in court, and that's exactly what happened here. A federal judge threw out almost all the evidence because of false and misleading statements an FBI agent made in an affidavit to get a search warrant for the defendant's house. So again, it doesn't even lead to the results that the FBI would want because they're obtaining this evidence in an unlawful fashion.
So a couple of issues here. Look, everybody wants the guys looking at child porn to get caught, but you can't let that cloud your judgment on how we run justice in this country. We've got to abide by the United States Constitution. So, and this is actually a pretty good case showing you why, if you don't, the trouble that it can create. So they catch a couple of people on child porn, great, okay, but the FBI is asking them to flag indecent material. All right, where's your line on indecent material? And then the question is, are they, does it just pop up on the computer and they're like, oh, well, I saw it, there's nothing, I can't unsee it, I'm gonna report it, or are they going fishing? And in the case that Anna was telling you about, they went to a different part of his computer that had nothing to do with fixing it to go find that stuff. Why? The FBI is paying them $500 a pop. So now you've incentivized every person that you're working with at the Geek Squad to go fishing, look at all parts of the computer to see if you can find anything on this person who asked you for help. Okay, and this is supposed to be a private corporation whose job it is to help you with your computer. Instead, they're looking to entrap you. And so, totally unacceptable, not even close. And then after they give them that evidence, the FBI then goes and gets a warrant and then tears your place apart.
That's right, exactly. So the way in which they obtain that warrant is not valid because they can't do that. They can't tell Geek Squad employees, we'll give you money if you fish around and you find indecent material. So Best Buy has responded to this, and Best Buy has said, look, if in the process of fixing the computer, our employees come across child pornography, they have not only a moral obligation, but in 20 states in the US, they have a legal legal obligation to come forward. But understand that this case is different because the employees implicated in this case or in these cases essentially went through the consumer's computers in order to find the indecent material.
And Best Buy said 3 out of the 4 employees don't work there anymore, and the 4th employee was reprimanded and reassigned because they took money. So if you're taking money to try to find incriminating stuff on people's computers who trusted you to fix it, that's obviously a problem for Best Buy. All of this is a huge problem for Best Buy because at this point, how many other informants does the FBI have inside the Geek Squad? And do you trust your computer to be handed over to them? So Best Buy's got to be in a bit of a panic here in terms of what it does to its customers. And look, one last thing. They find the child porn. We got to follow the right procedure, but nobody's broken up about the defendants in those cases.
Right.
Right, but with the government, the slope always slips, right? We just did a story about how the cops used tasers. They were supposed to use them initially in place of shooting someone. Now they just use them willy-nilly whenever the guy is not listening to him, right?
Right.
So it starts with child porn, which everybody's like, yeah, go get the sons of bitches, right? And then all of a sudden it's indecent material, and all of a sudden they're fishing all over your computer to find any kind of dirt on you.
So I usually don't like slippery slope arguments, but I think in this case you're absolutely right. I mean, we see it with the NSA, for instance, and what Edward Snowden leaked to the public. I mean, they were just indiscriminately spying on all of us, every single one of us, with no probable cause and collecting metadata on us. So government overreach in that regard is already, there's precedent for that. Now, with that said though, what I find interesting is every job has rules, right? Every job requires you to conduct your work ethically and to follow certain rules. So for instance, in our case, we could make up super scandalous, salacious stories and probably increase our views, but we're making up stories. You can't do that, right? That is a fireable offense. Why is it that with law enforcement, in this case the FBI, they do something unlawful? You need a warrant to search people, but they got caught. Let's focus on the Best Buy employees and whether or not there were consequences for them. But for the FBI, did they get punished for this at all?
And the guy who had the child porn goes off.
Exactly.
He gets off. I'm not sure I'm happy about that. But the guys who started the problem in the first place, the FBI, of course, they're the people in power, so no ramifications. Until Trump hears this story, then he'll probably use it like, oh, the FBI knew it. I bet you that Andrew McCabe / Hillary Clinton made them do it. Okay, but guys, I actually do have one last point about this because I think it's important. For all the people they didn't find child porn on, that doesn't mean they didn't go through your computer and look at all your porn anyway.
Right.
Right? Or look at all the other your finances, I don't know if you've got medical information on your computer. I don't know what kind of info you have. Basically, the FBI told these guys, go rummage through their whole computer, and so they know all that embarrassing stuff about you because the FBI was paying them in case they could find something illegal in your computer. That's a terrible idea and a horrible invasion of privacy.
Mark Cuban, he might be in a bit of trouble. Let's talk about it. A security guard or former security guard from a bar in Portland, Oregon has come forward to corroborate allegations that Mark Cuban had sexually assaulted a woman at that bar back in 2011. Now, back in 2011, the woman did go to police and did file a police report, and cops did investigate the allegations, but they decided not to, the prosecutor decided not to pursue the case because there was a lack of evidence. However, now Christopher White, who was a security guard working at that bar at that time, said he saw the NBA basketball team owner in the barrel room with his entourage and witnessed Cuban putting his arm around a woman for a photo. Now, here's the relevant part of what Christopher White had to say. She jumped away like she was not happy with him. That's when the energy in the room kind of exploded. So the allegation by the woman was that he put his hand down her jeans, the back of her jeans, and penetrated her with his fingers. Now, Christopher White said, I didn't have a camera on his hand, but it sure looked like it was too low to be just on her back. And he also said that Cuban appeared to be heavily intoxicated. He was slinking around all over the place. I believe we told him we couldn't serve him any alcohol. Also, White says that Cuban would point his finger at women with whom he wanted to be photographed and beckoned them. The way Cuban touched some of the women struck White as inappropriate because his hands moved well below the middle of their backs, he said. White also said that he was never interviewed by police, but later told a friend that what he had witnessed. The friend confirmed to Oregon Live that White had told him the same account. So they made sure to corroborate what White had said to his friends. So look, these are interesting allegations, and I'm curious to see how it plays out. Apparently the NBA has decided to launch an investigation against Mark Cuban, and we'll see what the results of that investigation will be. But it is important to point out that the cops did interview several other employees at the bar, and none of them said that they noticed anything strange.
That's pretty important. So I have mixed feelings about this story, and not because sometimes I get confused for Mark Cuban. So look, on the one hand, why would she make it up? And he remembers it from the time the security guard does, and told a friend, and that friend said, yes, he told me at the time. She obviously remembers it and filed with the police immediately. And told her boyfriend, and her boyfriend was really mad. Obviously, he remembers it from the time, so they're not making it up later. On the other hand, there are 4 witnesses who say they didn't see it. They can't say definitively that it didn't happen, but the cops talked to 4 people, the manager at the barrel room, 2 security workers, and a bartender. All 4 said they saw no misconduct from Cuban. Now, again, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means they didn't see it, right? And then what he describes, the security guard who now says, Christopher White, who says that he thinks it might have happened. He didn't say that he saw him doing it. He said he saw his hand going lower than the waist, she jumped, and then the energy in the room exploded. Other people say, and I question the other 4 witnesses a little bit because they say, no, nobody noticed anything and it was no big deal. Well, she went and filed with the police, so it seems more credible that the energy in the room would have changed, etc. But on the other hand, Christopher White didn't actually see it, right? So, and it's from 7 years ago, so. And
there's no surveillance because this all took place in a tent area where Mark Cuban was taking pictures with patrons from the bar. And apparently that tent did not have a camera.
Yeah.
So look, I think it's going to be a very difficult case to prove because it goes beyond just alleging something. You have to prove the case. There has to be some evidence, and I don't know if there is evidence outside of this one witness who says that he noticed something strange, but again, didn't say definitively that he saw what the woman is alleging.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean that that if it did happen, it's terrible. The allegation is that he put his hand inside her clothes and then penetrated her with his finger. That's really, really bad. But we do have a court of law and we do have a justice system, and you do have to prove it because what if it didn't happen? And so that's why we have a process. And so it's going to be really, really hard to prove whether it happened or it didn't happen. And I don't know why it's coming back up 7 years. He's not a politician. I know that he's a well-known guy and he has a TV show and he has a basketball team. And then there's the allegations that he was too drunk and he was gropey. You're allowed to be too drunk. So he's denying that he was that drunk, but so what? I don't get it. And gropey, I don't know what that means. Did you see him assault someone? If you did, that means a lot. If you didn't see him, calling him gropey doesn't mean anything.
Right, and also what might appear to be inappropriate conduct for you, I mean, it's really dependent on the women in the case, right? If any other woman was uncomfortable, hopefully she'd go forward to the police. But anyway, we'll see how this all plays out.
Yeah, so just one last time. It's not to diminish the charges if they can be proven they are significant, but it's incredibly hard to prove, and there's witnesses in both directions, so take it for what it's worth.
We got to take a break. Let's do that. And when we come back, an interesting law just passed in Minnesota. I want to tell you about it. So just come back.
Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/TYT interviews. And we've done some amazing ones recently.
So now, of course, you know the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all?
And we're in a time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history in 2017. Right.
Hey, what's up?
Excuse me, Aaron. Do you have any Grey Poupon? Go.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power panel.
Look at this panel. You want to talk about power?
Like a smart Destiny's Child.
We're all too strong.
We start a revolution. Yes, another one.
Aren't you excited? Wow. Some of the best writers in the country are right here on this panel, with the obvious exception of John Irola.
Let's not so quickly discount Harry Potter fan fiction.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country.
What ran me away from Christianity was judgment and condemnation.
Assaulting peaceful protesters in North Dakota, crazier than bombing Yemen, crazier than bombing Syria so much they ran out of bombs.
Reductive interpretation of what their motives are, what Putin's are, by these amateur experts is just beyond.
We don't kill our journalists, and they do.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Now, unfortunately, another story about women having their ass grabbed. It is what it is. Good way to
put it, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so did you guys know that until very recently, Minnesota did not criminalize or have a law against individuals who grab other people's bottoms
I was wondering which term you were going to use.
I'm like, which word am I going to use? But
buttocks.
There was buttocks. There was no law preventing people from grabbing other people's butts as long as that butt was clothed. So if it was a naked butt, it would be a little different. But for some reason, the law in Minnesota differentiated between a clothed butt and an unclothed butt. And so if it's a clothed butt and you grab it, no assault charges. However, recently the Senate Judiciary Committee in Minnesota voted unanimously to put a law on the books that would essentially make it illegal to grab someone in that fashion. So according to this new law, a first offense would be a gross misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in prison and a $3,000 fine. And that's, of course, if the person's convicted. A second offense could be upped to a felony punishable by up to 7 years in prison and a $14,000 fine. Now, there were recently 2 high-profile cases where 2 high-profile people were accused of grabbing women in that area. Of course, the first person was former US Senator Al Franken. And then the second was a former state senator, Dan Schoen, a Cottage Grove police officer, and he resigned from his elected post last year after allegations that included grabbing the buttocks of a female candidate at a political event.
Jesus, man, he grabbed a candidate's ass? Okay. So there's a lot of things that are fascinating about this. One is the naked butt exemption. Is there a situation where you're walking by naked women and grabbing their ass? That's not a common occurrence, is it? I mean, I would imagine that 99 out of 100 times they're grabbing clothed buttocks, right? Mm-hmm. So they're like, okay, in the nearly impossible case, you will actually get punished. But in the case that happens 99 out of 100 times, you're free to go. So that's weird. Mm-hmm. And then what's even weirder is that this clothed butt exception was not in place in 1888. They actually made that rule in 1988, so fairly recently.
And so the lawmakers were trying to figure out where the origin or what the reasoning or logic was behind making this clothed butt exception, right? And they can't figure out exactly what it is definitively, but what they think is that there was some concern in regard to coaches, because coaches for some reason love to slap athletes' butts. And that's like I mean it's like a weird, acceptable, like endearing thing in sports, and thus another reason why I don't understand sports. But whatever, people are having fun, I guess. So they were worried that coaches would get prosecuted or something.
Yeah, and it's called the coach's exception, and I never understood that either. I played football, and I never felt a compunction to pat another gentleman's ass, right?
Yeah.
Like when I think like, hey, good tackle, Clarky. I never thought like, yeah, way to go, Clarky, way to go, right? I don't know. I know they're not doing this. And in this case, you're allowed to pat in that kind of situation. You just can't be sexual or aggressive about grabbing someone's butt. That's what's now a crime.
You just made me think of something. So years ago, and I believe we talked about this on the show, someone had written a column in ESPN. It wasn't even a column, it was just a piece in ESPN about just like the homoerotic behavior in male locker rooms. And my husband used to play sports professionally, so he would tell me about that stuff too. And my guess is, that's just the culture, and most athletes probably accept it and they're okay with it. But in this new era where people are, hypersensitive about sexual assault and unwanted touching, I wonder if there are athletes who are super uncomfortable with it and might come forward at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure that might be the case. Yeah, I just never got it, and like I didn't feel the need to shower there either. And people love to walk around naked. I'm like, okay, but I got to shower at home. Okay. Anyways, now back to this. One serious point is, and it is a serious issue because it happens so often. I guess I was a little surprised at the severity of the sentence. I don't know if I should be, maybe it's a perfectly good, but a year in jail
is serious.
Is very, very, very serious. And look, I'd be really surprised if people really got a year in jail, but still, they could get up to a year in jail. Second offense is 7 years in jail. So Caroline Palmer, a public and legal affairs manager at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, had a line that really spoke to me. She said, "I bet if you ask, the vast majority of women have had this happen," which then made me think, that doesn't mean the vast majority of men have done it. It could be a smaller number of men doing it to a lot of women, but a lot of guys have done it. So you'd lock up a significant percentage of Minnesota and put them away for a long time if you actually start to enforce this law. But by the way, it's good to have it on the books. First of all, it's correct, that's sexual assault. Don't do that, right? Second of all, maybe gets them to think twice. I don't know that the jury should give 7 years, but right?
Yeah, I mean, as with anything in America, I feel like the pendulum always, not always, but tends to swing to an extreme. And when it comes to, punitive action, we love to imprison people for a long time over, and I don't want to say that this is a minor thing, but it's minor if you consider an insanely long prison sentence. I don't want people to spend that kind of time behind bars. I don't want anyone to spend 7 years behind bars over grabbing someone's clothed ass.
Yeah, and we don't make enough distinctions. So I can't stand the zero tolerance stuff. In this case, that's not relevant. But in this case, the no distinctions is, okay, clothed butt grabbing is in the same category as masturbating in front of young children.
Yeah.
Okay, now look, it's not to minimize being grabbed in the ass. Anna's talked about it on the show, how that has happened to her a couple times and she was traumatized by it, so it's no joke, and it is sexual assault and etc. And it's good that we're having an awakening about how unacceptable it is. But why are those two disparate things in the same bill with the same severity? Like, it's weird, but in America, everything's black and white.
Right, and that's the biggest issue. Like, we need to have dialogue and actually differentiate between the severity of a rape and something like this, or the severity of having some person masturbate in front of you versus someone grab. And by the way, again, on 2 different occasions in my life, I've had males grab my butt in that way. And for someone who hasn't had it happen to them, I think it's easy to kind of like write it off as not that big of a deal, but it's seriously degrading. I was actually shocked at how violated I felt because I wouldn't have thought that way prior to experiencing it. I'm just being honest. And it's just so degrading and you feel so violated. So, but even with that said, I don't think that it's on the same level as, someone, someone being raped or someone almost being raped, someone pushed to a bed, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, it's not the same charge as rape here, but exposing yourself or masturbating in front of young children is like, that should be a different crime.
Yeah. Let's move on to some other news. Berkeley, California has made headlines quite a bit in the Trump era, and it's always in the context of university students at Berkeley protesting against conservative speakers. But what happens when Trump supporters go after a liberal bookstore in the same area and threaten pretty extreme violence against that bookstore? Well, that incident recently happened. Interestingly enough, you don't see a lot of coverage of this story in the news, but I thought it was interesting because it provides a different perspective and a different side of the story that you don't often hear about. The video that I'm about to show you is disturbing, but it is what it is. Take a look.
I'm a racist because I support our president of this United States of America?
Yes, basically, yes.
You are so ignorant. That is the
commie scum.
Give me a good reason.
You're commie scum. We're going to burn down your bookstore. You know that.
Good reason.
Okay, we have you on recorded that you say you're going to burn down our bookstores.
Oh my God!
You're the ones that are burning books. You're the ones that are trying to get
history. Marxist, judgmental pieces of you can't tell us how to live. This is America.
You're the ones that are burning books.
Please leave now.
This is America. You. This is a public thing. Why don't you go in there and start?
Leave now. You're not allowed in our store.
I already said
now.
no. I'm not going to any store. So get the out of my face.
Would you put your
and this motherfucker wants to do it. Yeah, you motherfuckers. I was here March 4th, April 15th, April 27th. We ran your stupid asses out of the Berkeley. Trump is going to get rid of all you pieces of You know that? All you anti-American pieces of
genocide is coming. Your genocide is coming. Their hats say, make America America great again.
Hell yeah.
And you can tell that what this really means is make America white again.
You anti-white. Hey, Revolution Books, the only people that come here to buy this are Antifa pieces of.
Okay, see, they believe in freedom, the freedom to burn down your bookstore. That's not freedom. That's and threatening violent action is also a crime. But of course they're not sophisticated enough to know that. I mean, they don't know anything. They're so incredibly ignorant. But you can't threaten to burn down somebody's bookstore. And then they go, oh, you're the one burning books. Really, when? When? You're the only person threatening to burn anything down was you guys. The entire bookstore, which would also be burning books, by the way. You know, you guys are so intolerant. That's why you won't let people speak. By the way, Trump's gonna get rid of all of you guys. You're all commie scum, and I'm gonna burn you down.
Okay.
Gee, I can't tell who's the intolerant one.
Right. So keep in mind that video started with the woman asking, just because we voted for Trump, you think we're racist? And the bookstore employee or owner, I'm not entirely sure, responded back, yeah, pretty much. Yes, basically yes, that's what she said. And then they lost it. That was when things kind of went nuts. And then later in the video, the man can be seen telling people outside the store that, quote, Trump is going to get rid of all of you pieces of expletive, right? Oh, so what do you mean by that? Are you saying that Trump's gonna deport brown people? Like, what is he referring to? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's, and also, if you're not racist, what do you care if someone from a different political ideology thinks lowly, thinks that you are? Who cares? Why do you care so much? Like, it's interesting that it gets under their skin so much. They get so defensive.
Yeah. So if you took Trump's going to get rid of you guys in the best possible light, not racial, but just he's going to round up liberals and put them in prison or kick them out of the country.
Yeah, sounds like a tyrannical government.
Yeah, what part of that was freedom again? I'm a little confused about your ideology. So then they go around like crying nonstop about Berkeley, right? Just all this baby tears that I think when I see it, I think sad. Like, oh, I've been triggered. They won't let me say things like I'm gonna burn your bookstore down and threaten violence against you. Why won't they let me do that? What happened to freedom? Okay, they're weird, angry, violent snowflakes, but still snowflakes. And there is such a thing as being anti-white. And it's so funny because they accuse people of using racism too lightly. And then they accuse the other side of being anti-white with no evidence, right? So what's anti-white? Farrakhan just the other day gave a speech about how we're gonna go get the white man. And he called them the Satan and the satanic Jew and stuff. See, that's anti-white and it's anti-Semitic, okay? Because he said it, okay? On the other hand, saying, hey, I think Donald Trump is racist and I can give you 1,000 different reasons why. And it's not like I don't like him. It's that, for example, the Central Park Five and the birther theory, and I can go on and on. I have specific reasons why I happen to think that the things he says at a bare minimum have racial undertones. You're anti-white. Well, I didn't say that about Trump because he's white, but you see everything in a racial lens, those MAGA guys. So when you criticize them, they go, why'd you call me racist?
Look, what I don't understand is, why did they feel compelled to show up to, they showed up to the bookstore. It's not as if, these bookstore owners or employees showed up to their home. These two individuals showed up to the bookstore and just started yelling and just were incredibly unhinged. I mean, can you imagine if this happened to, I don't know, a religious bookstore? If a group of atheists, for instance, showed up to a religious bookstore and had this ridiculous unhinged rant, first of all, I would be 100% against it. As an atheist myself, I'd be against it. It's okay for people to have different political views and different political ideologies. Like, let's for a second, I know we're living in Trump era where everything needs to be this divisive and this disgusting, but for a second, can we take a step back and be decent human beings?
Can you imagine if black activists went to a conservative or religious bookstore in the middle of Kansas and said, we're gonna burn you down, okay? Oh, Fox News would talk about it 24/7. They talk, forget 24/7, they talk about it for years. Remember when they said they chanted burning down the bookstore of these poor white Christian folks in the middle of Kansas? You know how these people are, right? And then they get, so based on your actions and what you do, we call you things that you actually are. And then you assume that we're doing it because you're white. But that's only because you look at everything in a racial way. It's not because you're white. There's literally hundreds of millions of white people in the country, and they're not doing it, you are.
Anyway, all right, one more break. When we come back, coal ash, you're probably gonna be drinking it soon.
Oh, great. I have decided that I'm going to get ripped, okay?
What?
Okay?
Like, physically?
Yeah. Okay. What, you don't believe me?
I 100% don't believe you.
I will get so ripped, here's my prediction, that someone at TYT will say, Cenk, you've got to stop working out.
We're tired of you winning.
So you don't believe me?
Cenk, you don't have time to like do your daily duties for the main show.
Duties. You don't even have time for your daily duties. Because what you guys don't know is how great my muscles already are.
It's absolutely possible, but you can't have Leah run to the food truck to get you like 2 different types of grilled cheeses with like tater tots for lunch. Like you can't have that anymore.
Let's see what happens.
You also have to go to the gym regularly.
Let's see what happens. All I'm saying is, let's see what happens. Have I ever been wrong about a prediction? Almost never.
Hey Dave, as you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Hey, Cenk, what's up?
Aaron, I'm reading some of the comments on a YouTube video I did. What's a cuck? Go.
Back on the Young Turks, time for one tweet. By the Lake 23 says, radical idea, fellow men, keep your hands to yourself. Why is that so difficult? Like, didn't your mothers teach you any better? That's an old school way of upbraiding someone. I like that. Your mother should have taught you better, young man. Okay, members of the day are Gene Leddy and Nancy Wolf. Members get all of our shows, including our election night coverages, Rebel Headquarters, Old School. We had a great Old School with me, Jesus, and JR.
I heard about it
last night. Oh, but people are buzzing about it.
I should have stayed.
And Aggressive, Progressive, and all of that for the members at tytnetwork.com/join. And on Rebel Headquarters tonight, Dennis Kucinich. Okay, what's next, Anna?
All right. Recently, the Environmental Protection Agency released a statement indicating that they are allowing for the deregulation of the coal industry and the way that coal power plants dispose of coal ash. Now, these are Obama-era protections meant to protect our drinking water from toxic coal ash. But the Trump administration, and especially Scott Pruitt, who runs the EPA or is the head of the EPA, didn't like those regulations and decided that maybe it's up to the states to decide what those laws should be. So according to reports, the Environmental Protection Agency will scrap these Obama-era rules governing coal ash disposal. So the changes would provide companies with annual compliance cost savings of $100 million. So of course, I mean, look, of course they want to cut corners and save a ton of money, $100 million. Now, coal-fired power plants in the United States produce around 140 million tons of coal ash per year. The waste is usually started in wet ponds, almost half of which operate without liners and other safeguards meant to prevent chemicals from seeping into groundwater. So if you want to know how damaging that is to our health and especially for children, an EPA study from 2010 showed that people living within 1 mile of unlined coal ash ponds can have a 1 in 50 risk of cancer, more than 2,000 times higher than what the EPA considers acceptable. And it's as hazardous as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And when it comes to children, there are about 1.5 million children at risk who live near coal ash disposal sites, and it's shown to increase the risk of children developing learning disabilities, birth defects, asthma, and cancer. By the way, people in Flint, Michigan are still dealing with lead in their drinking water. It's 2018, so.
Yeah, so Paula Jean Swearengin is running against Joe Manchin in a primary on the Democratic side in West Virginia. And I bring her up only because she often talks about how it's not too much to ask for to have jobs and not to poison our kids. And that's the conundrum that the Republican Party seems to constantly put you in. You're either gonna have hot jobs and we're gonna poison your kids, or we're not gonna poison your kids, but you're not gonna have any jobs. I think we can do better. I'm positive we can do better. So for example, coal creates 160,000 jobs in the country. That's how many there are in the coal industry. Solar has 260,000 jobs, far more. And solar doesn't poison your kids. So it's one option. But in terms of what we should do in this case, so they do these unlined coal ash ponds. And I asked Joe Manchin, he was nice enough to come on for an interview. We had an interesting conversation, but I asked him about his donors. One of his donors has been brought up for leaking into ponds and streams. And he helped to deregulate leaking into ponds and streams. And he said, oh, I don't know who my donors are. Okay,
come on.
I mean, that's just one example, but all these politicians are like, oh, golly gee, did I help deregulate these industries? And look, at one point, in this particular article that I was reading, they were saying, it's possible that it'll leak into the groundwater. If it's unlined and you put it in a pond, of course it'll leak into the groundwater, of course it will. And so that's why you have the results that you have. Does anybody want to live in an area that has all this arsenic, lead, selenium, that is so damaging, birth defects, etc., they have it at rates 2,000 times the rate of what is considered acceptable? You want your kids living in that area? So when they say, oh, don't worry, we'll just give all the breaks to the corporations, it'll trickle down on you. Sometimes what trickles down on you is arsenic.
Right, exactly. And the whole point of the government, and this is always, the philosophical debate that people have regarding the role of the government. the main role is to protect the citizens, right? And the Trump administration, especially when it comes to deregulating environmental protections, does the exact opposite of protecting us. These environmental regulations weren't put in place as a form of government overreach. It was put in place, or they were put in place, to protect our drinking water, to protect our environment as a whole, to at least try to slow down some of the damage that we've already done to the planet. And this is a situation that's going to affect all of us. This is groundwater, this is drinking water. Why would anyone think that it's a good idea to deregulate an industry so they can make more money and cut more corners and simultaneously destroy the drinking water in certain parts of the country? It's insane. And so, when the Trump administration, and when Trump specifically talks about how he's looking out for the little guy, he's never looking out for the little guy, never, never. First of all, he wants to undo anything that Obama has done because he has held a grudge and will not let it go. But more importantly, when it comes to other members of his administration and other players in the right wing, all they care about is their donors. They probably even believe that climate change is something that is real and man-made, but it doesn't matter. As long as they're getting paid by certain industries, they are going to do whatever it takes to deregulate and serve them as opposed to Americans.
One last quote from Paula Jean Swearengin, and we'll have her links down below so you can check her out if you're interested, if you're in West Virginia in particular. She said, if someone else poisoned our waters and poisoned our kids this way, we'd go to war over it. But we let corporations do it because they donate to politicians. It's crazy. We got to change it. All right, Rebel Headquarters is next. Bye-bye. Welcome to Rebel Headquarters. Two amazing guests for you guys tonight, James Thompson and Dennis Kucinich. So let's get started right away. Joining me now, James Thompson, running for Congress in Kansas's 4th District. James, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Cenk.
No problem. So you almost got them last time. There's districts in Kansas that are actually surprisingly progressive. Yours is more heavily red district, and it was expected that you were going to lose by about 30 points in a special election, and you didn't. You lost by 6. You almost got them. What happened in that special election that allowed you to close such a huge difference?
Well, I think there's quite a few things, actually. We had a lot of progressive movement here in our state. In 2016, we took 13 of the seats back in the legislature, 1 in the Senate of our state. We had the Women's March here. Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton 2-1 in our state. So we had a lot of progressive energy going into it. And then one of the things that the people respond to here is people going out and talking about progressive issues, making sure that we're returning power to the people, getting big money, corporate money out of politics. People here like those ideas and they responded to them. And we refused to run a Republican-like campaign. We wanted to run on the progressive values that we were proud of, and people responded.
So the Democratic Party tells me that if you're going to win in a place like Kansas and in a red district like yours, you have to go more towards the Republicans. But you seem to have better results heading in the other direction. Why do you think that is?
Well, they say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting a different result. We looked at what had occurred here over the past 20 years, and it was basically Republican-like campaigns for the most part. And that's not what I'm about anyway. And so if I was going to run, I was going to run on the values that I believe in rather than trying to twist policies and programs that we believe in to fit some kind of mold that the Democrats in DC think are appropriate for this area. They don't know what they're talking about out there. They're not from Kansas. So I listen to Kansas Democrats and listen to the people that I'm going to be representing. So.
And Democratic Party, after seeing your stunning results and how successful you were, I assume that they're now 100% behind you, right?
There's a saying in the military about when you assume something, Cenk, and
I think I know what that
would
is.
Not, yeah, that wouldn't be a good assumption. We haven't heard anything from the National Party on this, so I don't know if they're going to be behind us or not once it gets closer to that time. They've been concentrating on our 3rd district and 2nd district here, which have some very good races going on there as well. But they write us off because of this, what they perceive as a red district, but they use our district as a basis for lowering the political report or Cook political scores, I should say, for both the 2nd and 3rd district down to lean Republican instead of safe Republican, even though they didn't touch ours. So we're not getting a lot of support out of them, and we're not counting on it, and I'm not looking for it. I don't think that they know what they're doing when it comes to running in a red state, and I want to run the race that I think is appropriate for the people I'm going to represent.
So, and James, by the way, is a just Democrat, so he doesn't take any corporate PAC money, so he's uncorrupted. In fact, you ran that race at preposterously low dollar per vote, right? You spent only $11 per voter. As a point of comparison, for the Ossoff race in Georgia, they spent $230 per vote. So that's a giant difference, and I would argue you did far better under the circumstances you were in. So what did you spend the $11 per vote on that was so effective?
Well, we spent a lot of it on just getting out the vote, making sure that we were doing ground and pound here. We were out knocking doors. We made over 330,000 phone calls, 220,000 texts. We knocked on about 40,000 doors. We bought every sign that we could find in town, any digital billboards, any mobile billboards, anything that we could find like that, we spent money on. And then digital, we crushed them in digital, in Facebook and Twitter, making sure that we were getting the word out there, YouTube. We took technology and used it. We had people from all across the country that were chipping in to help out, people that were coming in wanting to test out new ways of texting, et cetera. And we were written off already, so we had nothing to lose. But we tried it and it worked, and we were really excited about the results that we got.
Yeah.
And I think if we'd had a couple more weeks, we could have taken it. Or if the National Party had come in and actually helped out when the Republican Party came in, we could have won it too.
Yeah, and it was only a 60-day window because it was a special election, so that's what made it much harder. But now you could unleash your volunteer army for a much longer period of time. That's why I think you stand a pretty good chance of winning. And you know, James, you're telling me the same story I hear from a lot of the successful candidates, which is ground game and digital. And so the big consultants, they want you to spend money on TV because they get 15%. And so they don't, to you, wasting money on TV is the bug. For them, that's the feature. So
I think that's exactly right, Jake. And I think that, you know, we wanted to put our money where we thought we could get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. And that it's not that TV doesn't have its uses, but there are other ways to get out there. You want to motivate the millennial base, then go to the platforms that they're looking at. Don't just, you know, assume that everybody is going to watch, you know, cable television or the local news channels when a lot of people are only on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, those types of things, or Facebook and Twitter. And we really push that into our campaign.
So I want to just ask real quick about your policies too. I know you're Just Democrats, Democracy for America, Blue America, Brand New Congress, Sister Giant, they all endorse you. These are all wonderful progressive groups. You're a civil rights lawyer, but what are the policies that you're concentrating on in this race?
Well, we've got several. We are really wanting to make sure that we push Medicare for all once we get there. Understanding, though, that, you know, until 2018 is over with and we take back Congress, that if we don't take it back, we're going to have to look at some other options in there as well, because it's unlikely that the Republicans will go along with the Medicare for all plan. But I want to push that because everybody should be entitled to get health care and should be able to get the things that they need. Making sure that our working people have a livable wage, that they're able to provide for their families, have a dignified job. That in particular will make sure that we take care of some of the other problems that we have out there. If somebody has the ability to take care of their family and get their children educated and make sure that they have health care, that's going to take a lot of the issues off of their plate and allow them to have a much better result in their own lives. And then veterans is a very big issue for me as well. Not only because I'm a veteran, but I've seen firsthand the destructive effects of PTSD on families, including my own. And I want to make sure that our veterans are taken care of too.
All right, I want to make sure everybody's got the links for James, so let's put those up. And these are always in the description box on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and in the comment section on Facebook, votejamesthompson.com. And then obviously that his volunteer army has done some amazing work, so be part of that. And if you deliver this victory, it'll be, you know, it'll be amazing. And we get to prove all of the conventional wisdom guys wrong. And James, I think you're really onto something with that. There is a lot more progressive fire and passion in Kansas than people realize. You know, well, of course, we talked to Brant Welder in the 3rd district. He's now beating the Republican there, the incumbent, by 7 points. And so finally, you know, you've got your side, and I think part of the reason that the progressives are fired up and the Republicans in Kansas are not is because of what's known as the Kansas experiment, which was a disaster. So one, just for people who don't know it, just real quick, if you can tell us what it is, and 2, how is your Republican opponent tied to it?
The Kansas experiment, it was basically Sam Brownback's trickle-down economic plan where he cut corporate taxes down to the bone and then cut spending down to the bone as well. So it destroyed our economy here, it destroyed our education system, and we're going to spend years and years recovering from it because of this failed experiment. My opponent was the treasurer of the state, and although he likes to try to distance himself from any decision making in this process, he never once stood up and said, "Look, we're really hurting, you know, this state," and he's continued to support that plan, and we've seen him support it up at the national level. They're trying to implement this, and actually they did implement a form of this when they cut the corporate taxes. So the tax reform plan that we saw in Kansas is now being implemented on a national model, and it's going to hurt our economy. And I think that as time goes by, we'll see that. And my opponent just rubber stamps anything that either Trump or Brownback or the Koch brothers tell him to do, since we are in the Koch's backyard here. So.
Well, I can't wait for Thompson v. Estes round 2. I hope you guys don't make it pay-per-view. I want to cover it on election night.
I'm I'm interested to see it get covered too that night. So
yeah, well, I'd love to see that 1-2 punch of Thompson and Welder coming out of Kansas.
The Twin Towers of Kansas, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Progressives on fire in Kansas. I love to see that. And then maybe we could write a book about what's right with Kansas afterwards.
That's exactly what we need to be writing about. There's a lot of things right with Kansas, and we're seeing that here right now. So hopefully everybody will go out to our website, votejamesthompson.com, and check us out. So.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, James. Really appreciate it. Good luck.
Hey, thank you so much, James. Nice to meet you.
Yep, you too. All right, when we come back, the legendary Dennis Kucinich. Welcome back to Rebel Headquarters on the TYT Network. Now joining me, Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich, longtime congressman from Ohio, mayor of Cleveland in the past, Democratic presidential candidate in 2004 and 2008, and now a candidate for governor of Ohio. Congressman Kucinich, great to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Jen. Glad to join you.
All right, so let me ask you about your background, because I know it, but I want to make sure that everybody does. And even as I read through it again, I knew about 80% of it. There's a lot I was surprised to find. I didn't know how many Peace Awards you had. You got the Gandhi Peace Award, the Cranbrook Peace Prize, and the Peace Happy Award. You fought against wars like the Iraq War, and certainly that I knew, and you were famous for that. But I want to go all the way back in history, actually. before you got into politics, and you got into politics awfully young, but before you did, I saw that you had these series of jobs. Were you rich like most of the other congressmen, or how'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up the oldest of 7, and my parents never owned a home. So we were renters. And by the time I was 17, Cenk, we lived in about 21 different homes, including a couple cars. You know, the poet Langston Hughes wrote, "Life for me ain't been no crystal stair." I understand that. And yet the family stayed together, persevered. One of my strongest memories as a child was sitting in one of our apartments above Martha's Delicatessen at 10712 St. Clair, and listening to my parents count the pennies to pay utility bills. And I could hear pennies dropping on a metal tabletop as the kids would be on a mattress in another room. I could hear them counting the pennies, and they'd be dropping one by one. And after a while, I could hear those pennies dropping in my sleep. And frankly, I can hear them dropping still, because there are so many families out there who are struggling to make ends meet. And I like to say that not only remember where I came from, but this in many ways is who I am. It's reflective of the way I look at the world, remembering the people who are just trying to make ends meet and who need somebody to speak out for them.
Yeah, I see that you were a stock boy, a newspaper carrier, a caddy, and the list goes on to get along, but to get by. But at the age of 23, you became a member of the Cleveland City Council. 1, what possessed you to go into politics? And 2, how in the world did you win when you were 23?
Well, my first race was I was 20, turning 21, and I ran for city council in a very ethnic neighborhood in the inner city of Cleveland. At the time, I was a copy boy at the Plain Dealer, and a phone rang one night, and a guy was calling from a bar, and he was slurring every other word, saying that they were going to have a candidate to run against the person who just happened to be the councilman of the ward I lived in, which was in the same neighborhood where I went to high school. So I started to think about it, you know, well, how does somebody run for council? And I asked an assistant city editor, and he told me, and I just at that moment made a decision that I'm going to run for city council. I was 20 years old, and I just got the petitions and started circulating. The Plain Dealer ran a headline, and I think August 1st, 1967, protest with a guitar, not this candidate, 20. And so that was the beginning.
Okay, well, it shows your gumption all the way back then. So, you know, the story that I mainly want to talk about, and again, it's just to give people context of your career and what you fought for. And a lot of people might know you as a congressman, but I thought your fight with Muni Light and what you did as mayor was really interesting. So, I know it's a while back, but I think it's instructive. So, what happened there at the time?
Well, when I was clerk of the Cleveland Municipal Court, there was a big fight over whether Cleveland was going to own a municipal electric system or not. And frankly, the city sold it. This was in 1976. And I looked at the sale and I decided, hey, the city's getting cheated. And beyond that, why should the city sell a municipally owned electric system that was providing electricity at a savings of about 25% versus the private utility in town? So by getting into that fight, I was able to rally the people to save the system. And during that campaign, people said, well, why don't you run for mayor? So in 1977, I ran for mayor. I was elected on a promise to save the municipal electric system. My first act in office was to cancel the sale. And you would think that would be the end of the story, but it was just the beginning, because on December 15th, 1978, the biggest bank in Ohio, Cleveland Trust, told me that if I did not agree to sell our city's electric system to a private utility in which the bank was a business partner, the bank, would not renew the city's loans that I hadn't even taken out. And so it came down to whether or not I would keep my commitment to the people of Cleveland or cut a deal with banks and utilities and be their boy. And I just decided I was going to take a stand. I said no to the sale. They put the city of Cleveland into default. I lost the next election. And it took me 15 years to make a full comeback. And that happened only when the people of Cleveland understood that I put it all on the line for them. And so they brought me back. I got elected to state Senate, 8 terms in the U.S. House. And the margins I had in Cleveland were amazing. And I'm always grateful to serve this community.
Yeah, so they were doing disaster capitalism back then. And by the way, that's why a lot of politicians are afraid to stand up to the big banks, because they have a way of making you pay the price, whether it was your fault or not. And so, and I think you do now get a lot of credit for standing up to them and being proven right on that issue. So in this particular race, you're arguing for what you're calling the Ohio Real Deal. What is that?
Healthcare for all. I wrote the bill with John Conyers in Congress, HR 676, universal, single payer, not-for-profit healthcare. In Ohio, there are people who simply can't afford the insurance company's premiums, the co-pays, the deductibles. People are going broke trying to pay medical bills. Their kids are being denied opportunities to go to college because families don't have the money to pay medical bills and have extra money to go for their kids to go to college. So we, Terry Samples, who's my running mate, and I are very soon going to roll out an Ohio care plan that would cover everyone with basic health care. And it will enable people to have low-cost, affordable health care. And Ohio will be one of those states which will be known as a state that takes care of its own. The other thing, Cenk, is that we have plans for a 2-year free college. And I think there's so many families that are not able to pull the money together to send their kids to college. At least the first 2 years ought to be free. That would include trade schools, and we would enable our young people to get a start and not have to pay. There's other issues like clean water. Ohio has become a fracking capital. There are wells that are being drilled deep into the ground to bury toxic waste from other states. This has to stop. And what I've said is, when elected governor, I'd end this fracking and end anything that damages the environment of our state. I've also come out very strongly in favor of legalization of marijuana. And finally, the biggest issue in this election is banning assault weapons. I've come out very strong to say it's time for Ohio to join 5 other states in banning assault weapons. Cleveland, where I'm from, where I'm talking to you from, had an assault weapons ban in 1991, and it was taken down in 2010 by the then Democratic Attorney General on behalf of the NRA in Ohio. And he happens to be one of the candidates for governor right now, is in the same race I'm in. So this ends up being a huge issue in this race. People shouldn't have to worry about their kids going to school and not coming back because they've been a victim of a assault weapon attack. One of the things I've noticed about what's going on in our country right now is that people are thinking twice about the public space that they're in. If you're in a movie or a church or a shopping mall, wherever people congregate, there's always second thoughts. Is somebody going to come in with an assault weapon and start mowing people down? We got to get rid of assault weapons. They're weapons of war.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about one specific policy question. When you do a universal health care within a state rather than nationally, which is what you're proposing, what happens to private insurance within that state?
Well, they'd still be able to offer private insurance for specific things that are not related to general care. It's people may want some extra insurance. But the basic health care would be covered by an Ohio care plan. It was the same way when we offered a HR 676, the single payer plan. Private insurance would still be permitted to operate, but not if it duplicated then Medicare for all. In the case of Ohio, not if it duplicated our Ohio care plan.
It's very interesting. I would love to see how that experiment plays out. And Dennis Kucinich has shown throughout his career that he's bold enough to actually do the things that he says he's going to do. And so if you're interested in that proposal in Ohio, well, then I guess Dennis Kucinich is going to be the candidate you're going to back. So
Kucinich.com is the place to go to get the information.
Yep, and there's the links as well for donations and volunteers, and that will be in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube, in the comment section on Facebook. And you've got a really interesting race on the Democratic side, and I'm curious to see how it's going to play out, and then whether you guys can knock off the Republicans in unfortunately a growingly red state of Ohio. It used to be very purple, but in this wave election, anything can happen, and Ohio's not lost yet. So, and I know that you're going to fight hard to get it back. So, Congressman Kucinich, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk. And anybody wants to contribute, they can help make it happen, because we're operating a campaign that's based on public subscription, not on the interest of special groups. So, people want to contribute, go to Kucinich.com, help us out.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. When we come back for the members, we'll have the post game for you guys. That's at tytnetwork.com/join. We'll be right back.